Okay. Hi, everybody. So I am trying for the first time to record using a wonderful free app called Loom. So I'm excited about this. Welcome to our last class, if you can even believe that. And for our last class, I originally planned sonnets, but I wanted to throw Terza Rima in too. I think Terza Rima, you guys did such a great job with the triolets. I wanted you guys to be able to have a choice. So you can, of course, write a sonnet. You can, of course, write terza, but please pick one of them to workshop. And I'm going to take you through both of them. So first, the sonnet. So there is a Petrarchan sonnet and there is a Shakespearean sonnet. The Petrarchan I have literally pulled my hair out over, and I have, which is a feat for me. And I literally find it unethical to make you guys do something that I can't do. So I'll walk you through the Petrarchan briefly, but I want us to focus on the Shakespearean. And if you want to do a Petrarchan, you're a rock star, and that's awesome. But as you'll see, English is considered a rhyme poor language, so it just simply, in my experience, doesn't cater as well to the Petrarchan form. But you make the call. So for the Petrarchan versus Shakespearean sonnet, they do share a few similarities. They have 14 lines and they have what's called a volta or a turn. So for the Petrarchan, there are two subgroups. There's an octave, as in 8 lines, and then a sestet. You recognize the sestet from Sestina's, yes? So there's 8 and then 6, and it follows an A, B, B, A for the octave. The sestet can do one of two rhyme schemes, either CDE, CDE, or more commonly CDC, CDC. God help you if you want to do it. You can give it a shot. Let's hop back to Shakespearean. They are usually written in iambs. As you'll see, of course, our authors this week do take liberties. The really cool thing about a sonnet that I want you to pay attention to, and that you'll see in a lot of this week's readings, is that they usually link or draw attention to two disparate people, themes, stories, emotions, and turns. So it's like a little world within worlds. And then it kind of snaps shut at the end. But before that, you've got a turn or a volta. And we talked a little bit about turns, how turns are essentially surprises, whether it's in language, whether it's in an event, whether it's a shift in tone, whether it's lineation, that is the turn. So the volta occurs in a Shakespearean sonnet midway before the last couplet. So for a Shakespearean sonnet, there's 4 subgroups. You've got 3 quatrains, so 3 4-line stanzas and a couplet, and then a 2-liner at the end. And right before that couplet, you want to have some kind of a weird turn and you want to have some disparity. You want to have different forces at work. I would even argue, in the whole grand tradition of working with and against themes, what I think is really cool and what I like to do is even write sonnets, like, because who's to say we can't stretch the themes? Who's to say it doesn't have to just be about love? Can it be like about death or about like loving death? Or can't you use that dark humor? And how can you work that snapshot ending, that couplet, to snapshot and to kind of provide a punchline? There's so many different opportunities to do this. So even though a sonnet is traditionally used to proclaim romantic love, how can you play against the reader's understandings and impulses and work against that tradition to create that sense of pacing, not just in the turn of the sonnet itself, but in the themes that you're cultivating in your sonnet? And so, like I said, the sonnet goes and it snaps shut at the end. So it's great for a shocker ending. Think about one of the sonnets I assigned you, that Julie Kane, that really wonderful Julie Kane sonnet about how she got a used book and she found out that it was one that she gave to somebody who she was deeply in love with. And it snaps shut with that announcement of, damn, this guy really betrayed me. Snaps shut. It's got that, the man who said he would love me forever. So think about the sonnet as shock effect, which we don't usually think about. But like I said, when it has that snapshot at the end, how can you use that shock effect in humor, in another tonal shift, in a resolution? And again, it's your tiny, tiny little world. And I'll walk you through one of my favorite sonnets ever. I love Joe Bolton. He was actually that person I was recommending to Paulina, who wrote Ode to a Young Kentucky Woman, who wrote a series of poems about a woman from Kentucky. His whole book, The Last Nostalgia, is incredible. Read it and be richer for it. I do believe you can get The Last Nostalgia online. And he is a fantastic contemporary formalist. So here's an example of a sonnet, and you'll notice that Bolton takes liberties with the sonnet. It's part of a larger collection called Bad Sonnets. They're not really bad, they're terrific, but he calls them bad sonnets just because he does take liberties with the rhyme scheme. And it's also, they're also like very funny and self-deprecating. But notice how I'm going to walk you through women's bicycles, and you're going to see that there are one, two, three, right? You've got three quatrains, and then you've got a turn and the couplet, and you've got the A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and then G, G. So evening arrives in its muted pastels. The buildings glow like pumpkins, and the thin moonlight glints off a row of parked bicycles. 22 and already I'm a dirty old man. Okay, so you've got two central and disparate themes. Yes, you've got the dude essentially looking at women's butts, but not really. Like he's like looking at the seats where the women would be sitting on. Okay, so you've got two disparate themes. We could even argue more. Look at that first line, pastels. That's the A rhyme. And the thin. So then that B rhyme throws our ear off. And then pastels and bicycles. That's a fantastic off rhyme. And on top of it, he uses these enjambments, or this enjambment right here, thin, because using an enjambment is always going to distract from the form. And I'm a big fan, as much as I am about learning and maintaining the purity of forms, as I am distracting and burying your tools too. So here he does that, because by then it's thrown your ear off, right? Like you forgot about the pastels. And by the time you get down to bicycles, you're using a very, very slant rhyme. So your ear is kind of getting some delight from it, because fun fact, physiologically, the brain does light up when it hears rhyme. But at the same time, you can't 100% place it. And then thin and man, again, those are both off rhymes. And so then you have the next quatrain. So then you choose different rhymes. So you're choosing a C, D, C, D. Slouching on the steps of this woman's dorm, waiting. Again, another enjambment. New rhyme. He's using an ing for a friend. Enjambment distracts you again. And there in the parking lot, become. Another enjambment line break. He threw your ear off. Water with dusk and distance, a warping. So warping and waiting, these are very, very slant rhymes, but they're still rhymes nonetheless, albeit subtle, hence his bad sonnet naming of the series of poems. A warping of reflectors as she paddles softly home. I feel like that should be petals. And I realize I typed all of his poems out by hand, and so there's an occasional typo, forgive me. So become and home, wonderful slant rhymes, waiting and warping. But he's still remaining more or less true to the form aside from that. And then he goes to the next quatrain. Is it wrong that I want to occupy, new rhyme, that barrelless space, that sweet and chasmic lull, new rhyme, between the gyrations of her thighs? So occupying thighs, this is probably the closest rhyme that exists in the whole poem. It would break my poor male heart if she should fall. So again, fall and lull are slackened, and lull also throws off the ear because it's enjambed. And when you don't have those end stops to distract you, and there's that wonderful syntax, is it wrong that I want to occupy that bearless space. And I think it's hairless. And I think that's another typo. So let's just amend that right now. That hairless space, that sweet and chasmic lull between the gyrations of her thighs. Look at that syntax right there. He's not just saying, I want to get in between this girl's legs. He's using syntax manipulation in the form. And this quatrain is a wonderful example of that to tease us into what becomes an interrogative clause. And then we have the volta or the turn. I love the slender form of these machines with their black leather seats rubbed to a shine. So again, there's the off rhyme of and a new rhyme of machines and shine. But it's also kind of funny, right? Because one of the reasons why the black leather seats are rubbed to a shine is because the woman's butt is rubbing against it, right? So there's that kind of like comic humor that occurs with the volta at the very end. And the other thing I would even argue is that there are turns throughout the poem. I would even argue 22 and already I'm a dirty old man is a turn as well. So think of it this way. There are rhymes. He's writing to an inanimate object. But it's still a love poem and it's a funny one. And he acknowledges it's quote unquote bad as inaccurate. But it still is also a love poem, no less, even though it's to an inanimate object. And even though it's like essentially to where women put their butts, right? And so it's got women's bicycles. So those are also two seemingly disparate themes, right? The bicycles and the guy, but they're working together. So think of it that way. And he's also working against the tradition in terms of humor. But it's at the same time, it's very romantic and tasteful. And he uses plain spoken yet elevated language and syntax to be able to create those kinds of surprises. And so oh, forgive me. And so the couplet snaps shut, but I should mention technically because the volta comes before the couplet in itself. The volta, I would argue, is instead that hairless space, that sweet and chasmic lull between the gyrations of her thighs. So in other words, it's that wonderful interrogative turn where he's expressing concern, but is he really, right? Like he doesn't really care if she falls. He wants to like be in between her legs, but he's teasing us with this like elevated language and form and syntax. And so then it also in the couplets at the end they snap shut, so they still do provide that sense of surprise. As for Terza Rima, this form is really, really beautiful. It's an interlocking, echoing rhyme, which I absolutely adore. I think that Terza Rima can be wonderful for the blues, slightly modified blues, because technically blues poems have every stanza has the same end rhyme, but it changes. So, for example, for a blues poem, it would be A for the first quatrain or whatever, and then B for the next one, whereas Terza interlocks the rhymes. But I would still argue that that echoing, those traces of echoes, still borrow from an enter conversation in with the blues, because what doesn't? So in Terza Rima, it's a series of tercets. Tercets are 3-line stanzas. The end word of the second line in one tercet, it then delivers the rhyme in the first and third of the following tercets. So think it's a little bit of a nod to a pantoum too, right? It's not necessarily repeating the lines, but it's echoing the rhyme schemes. So there is that sense of obsession. And so the rhyme scheme is ABA, BCB, CDC, DED. It can be as long as you want, and it continues through that final stanza or line. Dante was someone who popularized the form, and it's great for, surprise, surprise, as the Divine Comedy and as his work shows, it's great for emotionally charged, cyclical, long narrative subjects, although there is no constricted prescribed length. And that echoing effect of rhyme can be great to lead or throw the reader's ear off. The other thing that echoing does is it doesn't just create obsessiveness, like kind of like a rolling, it's like literally like it flows. As much as I can't stand that word, it kind of like pulls the narrative along. But it also, you can throw the reader's ear off as well by using slant or off rhymes. And each stanza in itself can be read as a complete thought. So I want you to listen to this kind of echoing that's happening, and the way in which what happens is by the time your brain remembers, let's say, for example, the B rhyme, and you bring it back, the reader's ear is on a consistent hunt. And you can find ways to throw it off and then bring it back and use that pacing and the content and the rhyme to do it. So this poem is entitled, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, Acquainted with the Night by Robert Frost. And I want you to just listen to the interlocking and the echoes. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have looked down the saddest city lane. So see, rain, now this middle rhyme is now going to be sandwiched. The B is the B here. I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman in his beat and dropped my eyes unwilling to explain. So see, each stanza is a thought. So now we've forgotten about beat, rhyme C, but we're bringing it back. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away in an interrupted cry came over houses from another street. So do you see how that works? It because of the interlocking rhymes, they aren't necessarily stuck in your head as pronouncedly, and because it's not like a pantoum where you're using those same lines over and over, you are instead using this kind of echoing effect. So what subjects interlock? What even one of the things that I was taught to do by the great Laurent Vasselard is often, not always, because I don't want it to seem too gimmicky, but often if it's a poem with three lines, are there three different people? Are there three different themes at work? Are there three different emotions that are occurring? What exactly is happening with this particular poem? So that's another way to think of it. Like, think of it in terms of those threes. And so I have absolutely loved teaching you guys. I hope that you enjoy this video. And like I said, for next week, try each one if you want, and then pick one to workshop, whichever one you thought was successful. And I really, really look forward to this and hope you guys have an excellent week. Thank you.